Hey, what's going on, guys? I believe that Dana White is pissed at Dricus Du Plessis for turning down a main event spot at UFC 300 versus Israel Adesanya. And this is a theory that I've had for the last couple weeks, really since UFC 298, where I felt like Dana was subtly shitting on someone when talking about Leon Edwards and the different opponents. But now essentially we have confirmation. Israel Adesanya confirmed that he was offered the UFC 300 main event against Dricus Du Plessis, and Dricus Du Plessis turned it down. But that's not really the major part of this story. I think the major part of this story is I think there's a good chance that Dana White is vindictive towards Dricus Du Plessis. And I feel like Adesanya kind of discussed it, kind of slipped up a little bit in the interview he did on the podcast with Theo Vaughn that we're going to take a look at in this video. But I know a lot of people are going to doubt this. I know a lot of people are going to say, Joey, what do you know about Dana White? I knew right away when I watched the post-fight press conference for UFC 298, I knew when Dana was kind of hyping up Leon Edwards. You guys all saw it, and we're going to take a look at it here in a second. But you guys all saw him hyping up Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards will never turn down a fight, and he accepted 3 different opponents. Dana White's never really that complimentary unless he's really subtly trying to shit on someone else. And I believe who he was trying to shit on was Dricus Du Plessis, and I said this live as I was watching it. And now I went back in time to a Dana White's Contender Series post-fight scrum with Dana White, or press conference, whatever you want to call it. We're going to look at this as well. And basically he did the exact same thing and specifically referenced Dricus Du Plessis. And I think it's honestly unfair. We're going to kind of break it down a little bit in this video, but I think it's unfair. And I also think Dana White being Dana White and being vindictive and being petty, I think there's a chance that he takes it out on Dricus Du Plessis in a very kind of weird, strange way. And I think Adesanya hints at it a little bit on the Theo Vaughn podcast, and it's not really a clip that a lot of people have been posting around. So we're going to take a look at it in this video. But first off, I want to take a look at all the way back in September. This is before Israel Adesanya lost his belt to Sean Strickland. This is the Tuesday before UFC 293. And Dana White is discussing basically Israel Adesanya. How great is Israel Adesanya? You know, he's super active. He wants to fight all the time. And this is very kind of reminiscent of, or I guess, you know, telling, because it's almost exactly as the way he acted at UFC 298 press conference talking about Leon Edwards. It's almost eerie how similar it is. And at this point in time, the way Dana was talking at this Dana White post-fight presser, he was using it to shit on Dricus Du Plessis, 100% right here. You'll see very eerie similarities in this. So he starts off talking about Israel Adesanya. Listen to this. Tell me this doesn't sound exactly like the way he's talking about Leon Edwards.
The one thing that about Israel, and I say it all the time, he always wants to fight. As soon as the fight's over, you know, a lot of these guys take their time. Some guys fight twice, once a year.
By the way, you can just see by the look on Dana White's face, he's kind of irritated when he says that.
This kid, as soon as the fight is over, he's already in the back telling Hunter what he wants next, where he wants to go next, and who he wants to fight next, and he wants to fight in 3 months.
So there he is. He's hyping up Israel Adesanya. He wants to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. He wants to stay active. Dana White loves this. He looks at this as a company man, which I don't blame him. But he was using this to shit on Dricus Du Plessis because at this point in time, he was mad that Dricus Du Plessis turned down the opportunity to turn around from UFC 290, which was early July, to then get a title shot in early September against Israel Adesanya because he had lingering injuries. And he didn't want to just have a quick turnaround when he knew, look, this is the biggest fight of my life. I don't want to just have a quick turnaround and fight Israel Adesanya, potentially lose because I'm not 100%. So at this point in time, Dana was pissed at him. And he even kind of confirms it here in this very same interview, which I'll link every video I show in this video. I'll link down in the description so you can check it out for full context. But he's asked specifically now, I mean, keep in mind at this point in time, Dricus Du Plessis, there's no doubt, there's no way you could deny Dricus Du Plessis was #1 contender. And Dana White was asked about it specifically. And as you see by the look on his face, the response he's about to give is very telling. Listen to this.
Obviously, we initially thought this would be the Dricus Du Plessis fight. Dricus couldn't take the fight. Do you look at him as still the #1 contender, like winner, or, you know, whoever comes out of this weekend, that Dricus would be next?
Is Dricus Du Plessis the #1 contender? Which is undeniable. He's the #1 contender. But listen to Dana's response here. And look at his shit-eating grin right now.
You know how much I love when guys turn down fights. I don't know. We'll see what happens on Saturday, and then we'll go from there.
You know how much I love when guys turn down fights. I've told you guys this a million times, and I'm going to keep regurgitating this time and time again. Dana expects guys to fight even when they're injured. I'll go back in time to UFC 189. Jose Aldo pulled out of the fight with Conor McGregor. He had a rib injury. He said he broke his rib, fractured his rib, whatever it was. He said he couldn't fight. Dana White came out and said, no, 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 no. Jose Aldo's fighting. He's in this fight because it was a mega fight. Dana White didn't want him to pull out. They said, you know what? We'll just inject you with something, some type of painkillers. We'll find a way for you to make UFC 189. Ultimately, Jose Aldo said, you know what? There's no way I'm fighting. I'm going to end up losing my title because I have an injured rib. And then look what happened down the line. Jose Aldo ended up losing his title after being a dominant champ and didn't get an immediate rematch. But Dana was pissed that he pulled out of 189, tried to keep him in that fight. And Dana, he doesn't outright say it, but he gets angry when guys turn down fights when they're injured. And that's what Dricus Du Plessis did. Fair to Dricus Du Plessis, I completely understand. I know a lot of fans complained about it and whatnot. But if he has an injury, he doesn't want to fight when he's not 100%. Fair enough to him. I respect that. I understand that. Dana White is not happy about that. He was not happy about it. And he was not planning to give Dricus Du Plessis the next title shot. But what happened was, because I know a lot of people are going to comment down below, well, Dricus got the next title shot anyway at UFC 297 against Sean Strickland and won the belt. Yes, he did. He did get the next title shot. But that was out of necessity. They scrambled for a main event for UFC 297. They knew Sean Strickland. They could pay him. He would accept the fight. He didn't care if it was on quote-unquote short notice. And they knew Dricus Du Plessis had already had adequate enough time off and was training and would take that fight because he was basically clamoring for it at that point in time. So they said, you know what? We need a main event. This card's absolutely terrible, god-awful. Let's just book this fight anyway because there's really nobody else. Adesanya's not available. Hamzat's not available. There's no one available right now that's main event worthy to fight Sean Strickland at UFC 297. So they gave in out of necessity. They gave Dricus his title shot. Now, we're going to skip ahead now to UFC 298. And at UFC 298, I called this from the very beginning. I was watching this live while I was on stream right after the fights. And this is where Dana White starts hyping up Leon Edwards. This sounds exactly like the Dana White's Contender Series thing I just showed you. And then after this, we're going to look at Israel Adesanya on the Theo Von podcast. But listen to this.
What are your thoughts on the fight?
I wouldn't say that I settled.
By the way, he said, how did you end up settling on Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill as the UFC 300 main event? And that already got in Dana White's crawl a little bit.
Settled, decided on. It's apologies.
Yeah, listen, we were out there talking to lots of people, trying to make lots of fights, and
do I shit on Dricus Du Plessis right now? That's what he's thinking. I'm telling you, and I said this live. I was watching this live. Go back and watch my stream for UFC 298 after the main event. I called this literally as I'm watching this in real time.
in this business, it's about taking opportunities. Headlining UFC 300 with all the buzz and all the energy around it. Let me say this.
Let me just translate this for you. What he's saying is, and I've tried to explain this over the last couple UFC 300 videos, Dana White, when he was trying to book some of these UFC 300 fights, and there was guys that were potentially turning it down or asking for more money or whatever was going on behind the scenes, Dana White in the UFC was trying to sell them on UFC 300 like, this is a mega card. This is going to be a lot of exposure. This is going to be great for your brand. If you get a statement win here, your star power is going to go through the roof because so many people are going to be watching UFC 300. So right here, he's basically saying Dricus Du Plessis messed up. He should have never turned down the opportunity, the opportunity to fight in the main event of UFC 300. And then he goes on a diatribe about Leon Edwards, which again is like a subtle jab at Dricus Du Plessis.
Leon Edwards has had like 3 opponents throughout this thing. Leon Edwards doesn't say no to anybody. This kid is an absolute stud. He's had like 3 opponents thrown at him during UFC 300. Yes. Was willing to take on anybody, man. Kid's an absolute stud. Leon, thank you. Much respect.
So again, I've covered this. The UFC and Dana White were scrambling behind the scenes to try to find a main event for UFC 300. Dana overpromised, underdelivered. I still think Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill is a very good UFC 300 main event if Jamal Hill is 100% healthy, which is kind of up for interpretation right now. Time will tell. But the reason Dana White doesn't come right out and start crapping on Dricus Du Plessis is Dana's smart enough to know, listen, if I crap on Dricus right now, essentially what I'm saying is I'm not happy with the UFC 300 main event. So if he goes out of his way to say, yeah, I wanted Adesanya versus Du Plessis, then he kind of makes the main event for 300 that he just announced, he kind of makes it look smaller. You know what I mean? I hope that makes sense to you guys. And you kind of see it a little bit more here in a second when they ask him, like, what was going on behind the scenes. You know, were there guys asking for more money? By the way, look at this freeze frame I got right here. That's absolutely hilarious. And he kind of copes a little bit more about UFC 300. And he says, these are it. You know, it's such a promotion for Hill versus Pereira. Listen to this.
Oh, no. This was not about money. It was all about timing. We got 3 killer cards in a row. And in this business, you have injuries and all kinds of other bullshit that goes on behind the scenes. And you know, we've been talking about 300 forever, and we were just trying to make the best fights that we could possibly make. We had 2 more fights to make, and we were trying to put on 2 badass fights. So these 2 guys are it.
I mean, what a promo. These 2 guys are it. We were trying to make badass fights. Dana's just trying not to slip up here. He's basically saying, we really wanted Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, but instead we're left with Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. But he doesn't go that far because he knows he doesn't want to step on the UFC 300 main event. But that's what he's saying here. You know, if you can read between the lines, if you know Dana, you've been watching Dana for as long as I have, you can easily read between the lines. I called this literally live. Now, what we didn't have confirmation on yet was the fact that they tried to make Adesanya versus Du Plessis. We all kind of knew it. I knew it. That's the fight that I was predicting. Dana White kind of, even if you go back, and I wasn't gonna make this video too long by showing the clip. If you go back to the UFC 296 or 297 post-fight press conference, Dana White almost slips up and basically says, we want to make Dricus versus Adesanya. That is the goal. You had Dricus at the post-fight as well saying UFC 300 sounds amazing. And it just didn't come to fruition. But if you go back, I made an entire video and I'll link it in the description. But Dana, description, it sounded like I said description there. But Dana wanted to make that fight. He had his eyes on Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis from the second that decision was read at UFC 297. And he's pissed that it didn't come to fruition. But we didn't have 100% confirmation. Well, Israel Adesanya went on Theo Von's podcast and he discusses how he was summoned for UFC 300 and basically that Dricus turned it down. I think a lot of people are going to use this to kind of shit on Israel Adesanya. I don't even have it in the right spot right now. But people are going to say, oh, he's complaining that Dricus is injured, blah, blah, blah. But let's listen to it and then we'll break it down.
There's some things that were meant to happen. They summoned me. I'm sure this is out there now. Eugene said some stuff. But they summoned me. They summoned me for 300. And I was like, yep, let's roll. But their side didn't want it.
So there you go. They summoned me for UFC 300. Their side didn't want it. And Theo Von asked him right here, was it Dricus?
So I was like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to keep.
Who, DDP side?
Yeah, they didn't want it.
Wow.
But, they just fought Strickland. So maybe he had a little bit niggly injuries and stuff. But, hey, we all got little, niggles and whatnot. So
there you go. You hear him say, DDP side didn't want it. And I think people are going to use this to kind of find, people don't like Israel Adesanya because he's cringy. They're going to say Adesanya's trying to crap on DDP for not taking the fight. He literally then said, well, he just fought Strickland. He's probably dealing with some injuries. So he made that very clear. He did say we're all dealing with injuries, but he did make it very clear he's probably dealing with some injuries. But nonetheless, he was offered the fight. Dricus Du Plessis turned it down. Whether, fair or unfair, I believe it's more than fair for Dricus to turn it down, considering he fought in late January, and then essentially a turnaround till April is exactly 3 months. It's a little bit more than UFC 290 to UFC 293, but still, it's 3 events. It's just a little bit longer in terms of the time period. But I truly believe Dana White is super petty about stuff like this. And when I went through, and I didn't watch this entire podcast, but I watched about a 5-minute spot. Like I rewind it back once I figured out where he was talking about Dricus Du Plessis and whatnot. I watched a little bit before, a little bit after, and I found this little, I want to say just a little Easter egg in this podcast where it kind of leads me to believe what the UFC's plans are next and how the UFC could actually be vindictive towards Dricus Du Plessis for turning down the Israel Adesanya fight at UFC 300. And I don't think anybody's even posted this. And this is a very subtle thing that I just saw, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So let's check this out.
Predicted, I've manifested, I've made things happen in there that come to fruition. And I've seen it so many times when I get to South Africa or Morocco or Nigeria, wherever it is, the event is. When I get there and my people see me, it's Mob City.
So there you go. He talks about, well, when the event, if it happens in South Africa or Morocco, or I think he said Nigeria, I don't even remember that fast. I forgot the places he listed. But it shows that the UFC has talked to Israel Adesanya, and since UFC 300 didn't work out, the UFC is going to try to make Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya in Africa. And Dana White's promised, oh, we're going to Africa, we're going to go to Africa, we're going here, we're going to China last year. And a lot of the times he doesn't deliver. But I believe a fight between Dricus Du Plessis and Israel Adesanya is just too perfect. It's just too perfect not to have in Africa. And I'm wondering now, it was almost a lock to happen in South Africa because Dricus Du Plessis is South African. But the fact that Israel Adesanya listed those other two places tells me that when he's discussed it with the UFC, they've kind of named those other two places. And it would not be beyond the realm of possibility for the UFC to book Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya somewhere else in Africa other than South Africa, just because Dana White is pissed at Dricus Du Plessis. Don't be surprised if they book it somewhere else, Morocco or wherever else they have the infrastructure to hold an event of that magnitude. Don't be surprised if they do that just out of spite because Dricus Du Plessis turned down 300, or also don't be surprised if they can't make that work. Don't be surprised if they have it in the United States. Don't be surprised if it ends up in Las Vegas, maybe International Fight Week in June. All because Dana White is pissed off that Dricus Du Plessis turned the fight down. I mean, there's so many examples, and that's the last clip I'm going to show you, but there's so many examples of Dana White acting like this. Aljamain Sterling went to war against Henry Cejudo at UFC 288, and Dana White basically already announced UFC 292, where you had Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley, all to make it favorable circumstances for Sean O'Malley. Aljo came out and said, I'm dealing with some lingering injuries. I don't know if I can go that fast. Dana White said, all right, we'll make an interim belt. I believe UFC 292 was like mid-August, maybe August 19th. And UFC 288 was early May, maybe like May 8th, May 9th. It was such a quick turnaround. He's saying he's going to make an interim belt. And Dana White gives Dana White privilege to fighters who basically are just super active and willing to step up for the UFC anytime they ask. And Dricus Du Plessis is too smart for that, because sometimes when you do that, it negatively impacts your career. Adesanya's had a great career and he's been able to do it, but sometimes it negatively impacts your career. So Dricus Du Plessis is smart enough to say, you know what, it would be great to main event UFC 300, but it's not ideal circumstances for me. If I'm going to defend my title against one of the greatest middleweights of all time in Israel Adesanya, I want to be at 100%. Or you're going to have to pay me much more money to take this fight on a quicker turnaround and have a shorter training camp or whatever it may be. Dana White doesn't like that. So don't be surprised if we get Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya in Africa somewhere, but not South Africa. And don't be surprised if they can't make that happen, it might end up in Vegas, or maybe Madison Square Garden, or maybe like a April, or not an April, maybe like a June or July event. They don't typically have one in like New York, maybe at a different place other than Madison Square Garden. I think the Barclays Center they've had sometimes. I think they had to be there at one point in time. Do not be surprised if that's the way they get at Dricus Du Plessis, or don't be surprised if like next time they offer a fight for Dricus, if he turns it down and says, oh, I need another month or whatever, I'm dealing with this. Don't be surprised if all of a sudden they say, okay, we're going to put an interim title on the line. Do not be surprised, because Dana White was elevating Leon Edwards, but it was a subtle jab at Dricus Du Plessis. He was angry that Dricus Du Plessis turned down this main event spot against Israel Adesanya because he expects fighters to fight injured, even though they absolutely should not fight injured. So I just wanted to bring this up because I think a lot of people might have missed these things. But either way, this confirms that Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya for the middleweight title is next, most likely somewhere in Africa. But it may not end up being in Africa after all, because Dana White is so petty. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.